It is early April, 1801. The British fleet, under Admirals Parker and Nelson, has just defeated the Danish fleet in what would turn out to be the First Battle of Copenhagen. But the Danes are not ready to throw in the towel yet. Danish Crown Prince Frederick wants to negotiate a short truce. Both sides knows that the Danish allies in the League of Armed Neutrality, Sweden and Russia, are preparing to move to the aid of Denmark. Sweden had earlier that year prepared a fleet of 6 ships of the line and 3 frigates for the aid of the Danes. But this force was stuck in Karlskrona harbor because of very unfavorable winds. This failure to aid its ally angered the Swedish king, Gustav Adolf, who fired both his naval commanders for insubordination, though both were later cleared by a military court. The king named legendary Swedish naval officer Rudolf Cederström as the new commander and promoted him to rear admiral. Cederström's fantastic life is one which we will get back to in an episode of its own in the future. With his new command, Cederström managed to get the fleet out of Karlskrona. But at Bornholm, he got new orders from the king. The news of the Danish defeat had arrived, and Cederström was recalled to defend Karlskrona from the British. Thanks to favorable winds, Cederström managed to beat the British to Karlskrona, and the Swedish fleet could take up defensive positions inside the island chain around Karlskrona harbor. Soon the British fleet arrived. Admiral Parker sent a letter to the Swedish commander, Karl Kronstedt, where he asked if Sweden were prepared to leave the League of Armed Neutrality. Kronstedt, instructed by the king, responded that Sweden would stand by its obligations to the League. In his fantastic book about the British Navy in the Baltic, Nils Modig writes about the situation that now arose. Whether Parker and Nelson seriously considered fighting a battle in Karlskrona's roadstead, we do not know, but it's doubtful how it would have turned out. The narrow passage leading into Karlskrona's outer roadstead runs between Kungsholm Fortress and Drottningsjö Citadel, armed with 143 and 83 cannons respectively. Beyond that, the anchored Swedish fleet's line would have greeted them with over 200 cannons. In a perfect so-called T position, the Swedish line would have concentrated its fire on the head of the British column as it approached. The entrance was also blocked by a boom barrier. Even if the British had somewhere managed to break through the entrance, they would have been met by the city's fixed defenses and blockading ships, armed with an additional 200 cannons. According to legend, there was also an incident where British units scouting the waters approaching the Swedish forts were almost hit by cannon fire from the forts. The commander of the fort was nervous about the cannons' reliability and had them test-fired. But since it was a foggy day, they did not know that they almost hit the British, who in turn got nervous that the Swedes could aim so well despite the fog. In the middle of all this, Parker was relieved of command and recalled home, which put Nelson in command. Nelson chooses not to attack. Instead, he wanted to attack the Russians, which were the bigger threat. He left a force outside Karlskrona and sailed for Reval with the rest of the fleet. Nelson had hoped to fight the Russians while their forces were divided, but when he arrived, it turned out they had been able to concentrate, and their forces were now way too strong for Nelson's reduced fleet. In the end, none of this mattered. The new Tsar, Alexander, signed a treaty with the British in June, which gave them all they wanted, and war was averted. With that, the Battle of Karlskrona never happened.